guys, and welcome to the last week of remote learning for this school year. So we are going to finish up factoring trinomials this week, and then we're going to look at solving quadratic equations. But we're going to first in this video look at Objective 1, and Objective 1 talks about factoring quadratic trinomials with an a value of 1. And this week we're going to start looking at what happens when c is negative. So last week we did c is positive, and so we're going to start with a little bit of review. Remember, when you're multiplying polynomials, you are distributing everything from the first thing to everything in the second thing. And factoring is just going backwards with that. So if you are multiplying two things and they have the same signs, then your answer is going to be positive. Whether that's two negatives or two positives, when you multiply them, their answer is always positive. If your signs are different, then when you multiply, your answer is going to be negative. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on in the later half of this video. So go ahead and take a couple seconds, well, it's probably going to be a couple minutes, and factor each of these expressions completely. So remembering that the c value goes on the top and the b value goes on the bottom. And you always want to make sure you're paying attention to your signs. And then you make your little setup. And we're going to have a plus and a plus. Since c is positive, the b will double up. So 5 is prime. There's only one option, and that is 1 and 5. So plus 1 and plus 5 makes our answer. Remembering if c is positive and b is negative, then we'd have a positive 15 up at the top and a negative 8 down on the bottom. When we think about our factors of 15, we know that we have 1 times 15 and 3 times 5. And the ones that will give us 8 are 3 and 5. Oops. Since c is positive and b is negative, we keep the signs of b. So that x minus 5 times x minus 3 is our factors. Always remember, you can check it back by double distributing. So x times 3, so that's x squared minus 3x. And then negative 5 times x and negative 5 times 3 gives us negative 5x plus 15. Combining your like terms, you get x squared minus 8x plus 15. And that's what you started with, so you know that this is indeed the correct answer. So go ahead, take a couple minutes, and just finish out the rest of these and put your answers into the Edpuzzle, and then you can check them at the end. So here are the rest of those answers. Go ahead and take a couple seconds, check them, make sure you got them right before we move on. So all of our C's in those problems were positive, so we knew our signs had to be the same. But now we're going to look at what happens if our C value is now negative. And the process really is going to stay the same. We're still going to find the factors of C, remembering that if C is positive, our signs will be the same. If C is negative, then the signs will be different. We'll then decide which factors of C we'll add to get B. And remembering that if we have a positive C, whatever sign B has, we'll use that. If we have a negative C, whatever sign is B goes with the bigger factor. Our signs will be different. And even though it says add, the actual value will decrease and you'll technically subtract. But we're always going to think about it as adding. We'll still write our factors into that x plus or minus and then x plus or minus form with the parentheses. You'll use a plus for positives and a minus for negatives. And remember, it doesn't matter what order you put them in the parentheses as long as the signs are correct. And then you can always check yourself by multiplying back your answer. So let's take a look at number 1. Our C value is negative 9D, and so it'll go on top. Our B value is positive 1, so it'll go on bottom. Remember, if there's nothing in front of a variable, it's understood to be the 1. Then you're going to think about your factors of 90. So we're going to write out our factors of 90 as 1 and 90, 2 and 45, 3 and 30, 5 and 18, 6 and 15, 7 doesn't work, 8 doesn't work, and then 9 and 10. So now we look through our list and we say, all right, how can we get 1? Now, sometimes you can only get 1 in one way, and that is to subtract and have different signs. Sometimes you can't. So you always do want to remember, if C is negative, that you're going to get to 1 by subtracting. So when you have that negative 90, that means you're going to subtract. So we know that 9 and 10 will get us to 1. Then you just kind of play with your numbers. If I make my 9 negative, then negative 9 plus 10 is positive 1. And that's what we want. If we had a negative 10, then a positive 9 and a negative 10 would make a negative 1. Remembering that the negative just changes the sign of the answer will stay the same. So we're going to have n minus 9 and n plus 10. We can check it back by double distributing. So n times n is n squared. N times 10 is 10n. Negative 9 times n is negative 9n. And negative 9 times 10 is negative 90. Combining our middle terms, we see that n squared plus 1n minus 90 gives us what we started with, so we know this is our final answer. Looking at number 2, again, we take the negative 12 as our C, and don't want to write C, we want to write negative 12 at the top. And at the bottom, we want to write positive 4. The positive because it's up at the front to make sure we get the right sign. Now we're just going to think about our factors of 12. So we have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. Now when we look at our list, we know that we want to subtract to be 4. And when we look through our list, we see that 2 and 6 will subtract to be 4. So we'll put 6 and we'll put 2. If I have negative 6, then that's negative 6 plus 2, which would give me negative 4. So I know that can't be right. So I'm just going to move my negative over to the 2. 6 plus negative 2 gives me positive 4. So we just write it in, n plus 6 times n minus 2. Checking it back, we have n squared minus 2n. And 6n minus 12. Combining our middles, we get n squared plus 4n minus 12, which means that our answer is indeed correct. And let's do one more together, looking at number 3. Again, C value goes on top. It's a negative 24. B value goes on bottom. It's negative 2. Thinking about our factors of negative 24, it's 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6, and 5 doesn't work. Then you're going to look through your list and figure out what will subtract to give me 2. And we see that that is 4 and 6. If I put negative 4, then negative 4 plus 6 gives me positive 2, which is not correct. So we want to move the negative to the 6. 4 plus negative 6 gives you negative 2. So writing it down, n plus 4 times n minus 6. And checking it back, n times n is n squared minus 6n plus 4n minus 24. Combining the middles, we get n squared minus 2n minus 24, which matches what we had. So, except I used n's instead of m's, but that's okay. So that means that this is our final answer. So, a couple of things to note. If you don't need to make the list of factors to this side, then that is completely fine. Some of you will be able to do that math in your head and not need the list. And if you can do that, that is great. Some of you might want to just make the list and you might not need to make the X puzzle, and that is fine as well. Some of you won't need either of those two things and can go straight from trinomial to binomials that are factored, and that also is perfectly fine. You might be able to do the check in your head, and if you can, that is fine as well. The main thing is that you're factoring correctly. So now take some time and do the next 6 problems, making sure to watch your signs and come back to check your work. Here are all the answers for those 6 problems. The only one I want to really talk about is this number 5, and here's why. Number 5 is one of those tricky ones. You have -6 for C and -5 for B. If you make your list of 6's, you get 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. You can get 5 from both 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. You subtract 1 and 6 to get 5, and you add 2 and 3 to get 5. This is where it's very important to make sure you're paying attention to your signs. Since we want a -6, that means our signs need to be different, and we need to subtract to get our B value. So 2 and 3 won't work because we need to add them, and that is why it is -6 and +1 instead. So that's why you want to make sure you're very careful and paying attention to what your signs are, especially when they become mixed up and they're different. All right, so here's a little cheat sheet for you to help you remember. Remember that if you have a positive C, you will add, and if you have a -C, you will subtract. But your signs will be, because your signs are different for -C and the same for positive C. So that'll help you get those set up. All right. Stay tuned for the next video that talks about special cases of factoring.